The evening my son humiliated me in front of an entire restaurant. I finally understood that silence can carry more weight than anger. People often believe silence means surrender. They mistake a calm expression for weakness and quiet patience for fear. At 72 years old, I had learned otherwise. Some silences heal, others protect. And then there is the silence that hides a decision so final it changes everything. That night, I chose the last one. The restaurant was one of the most expensive places in the city, selected by my former wife, Diane, and her new husband, Victor Hale. Every polished surface reflected wealth. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Waiters moved with rehearsed precision, and conversations drifted through the room in polite whispers. I felt strangely out of place, not because of my clothes. They were clean, tailored, and well cared for, but because everyone around the table seemed obsessed with appearances. Across from me sat my son, Lucas, dressed in a designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. His wife, Claire, admired him with the kind of smile reserved for celebrities. Victor leaned back comfortably, enjoying every second of the evening as though he owned the room. Perhaps, in his own mind, he did. Lucas lifted his wine glass. "Our company just secured another major investment," he announced loudly enough for nearby diners to hear. "Things are moving faster than ever. We're already discussing expanding into 3 more states." Claire clapped softly. "I told you it would happen," she said proudly. "You deserve every bit of this success." Victor smiled with practiced confidence. "That's what ambition looks like," he added. "People who dream big eventually leave everyone else behind." His eyes briefly shifted toward me before returning to Lucas. The message was obvious. I quietly continued eating. Years ago, I would have corrected them. I would have explained where the company's funding truly came from, or reminded Lucas how difficult his first business proposal had been. Instead, I remained silent. Diane finally looked at me. "Aren't you proud of him, Harold?" It sounded like a compliment. It wasn't. She wasn't asking whether I loved my son. She was asking whether I admitted he had become more successful than I ever was. "I've always been proud of him," I answered calmly. Lucas barely acknowledged my reply. He continued describing luxury vacations, executive meetings, expensive watches, and future investments. Every sentence sounded rehearsed. Every achievement seemed designed to impress Victor. I watched quietly, not because I lacked anything to say, because I already knew something they didn't. The company Lucas believed he had built rested on foundations he had never bothered to examine. Victor folded his hands together. "Success," he declared, "belongs to people willing to take risks." Harold always preferred playing it safe. Good engineer, hard worker, but some men build bridges while others build empires. Lucas laughed. "Exactly." He pointed casually toward me. "Dad never understood how business works. He spent his whole life worrying about savings instead of creating wealth." Claire nodded in agreement. "I suppose every generation sees money differently." I smiled politely. Inside, however, another realization settled into place. None of them respected hard work anymore. Only appearances. Dinner continued with more stories about expensive purchases and influential connections. I barely spoke. The waiter eventually arrived carrying an elaborate chocolate dessert and placed it in front of each of us. Victor reached for the bill before anyone else. "My treat," he said. It wasn't generosity. It was another opportunity to display superiority. Lucas suddenly pushed back his chair. The scraping sound echoed across the dining room. Several nearby tables turned to look. He stood, raised his glass, and smiled confidently. "You know," he announced, "there's something I've wanted to say for years." The room became noticeably quieter. He pointed first toward Victor. "This man taught me what winning actually looks like." Then he turned toward me. "And my father," he paused just long enough to make sure everyone was listening, "is the perfect example of what happens when someone settles for being ordinary." A nervous silence spread through the restaurant. Lucas wasn't finished. "I'll be honest." He looked directly into my eyes. "You've always been a loser, Dad." The word echoed through the room. No one moved. Claire looked satisfied. Victor hid a smirk behind his wine glass. Diane lowered her eyes to her plate but never defended me. Not once. For a brief moment I saw the little boy who used to hold my hand while visiting construction sites. Then that memory disappeared beneath the man standing before me. I slowly placed my fork on the table, folded my napkin, stood up, no shouting, no insults, no dramatic speech. I simply looked at each of them one final time before walking toward the exit. The heavy wooden doors closed quietly behind me. The cool night air greeted me as I stepped onto the sidewalk. I didn't call a taxi, I walked. Each step felt lighter than the last. By the time I reached my modest brick home beneath the old oak tree, my decision had already been made. Inside my study, surrounded by decades of engineering plans, photographs, and carefully organized files, I switched on my aging computer. A secure folder appeared on the screen. For years it had remained untouched. Tonight, that changed. I opened it. Every document was exactly where I had left it. Company ownership, property records, vehicle agreements, investment trusts, carefully arranged pieces of a truth my son had never known. I opened my email and typed a short message to the only lawyer I trusted. Subject: Begin Sunset Protocol. I read the words one last time. Then I clicked send. The first move had finally been made. The next morning, I arrived at the office of my attorney, Margaret Ellis, just before 8 o'clock. She had represented me for more than 20 years. During that time, she had become more than a lawyer. She was someone I trusted completely, one of the few people who knew the truth behind every investment I had quietly made. She greeted me with a cup of black coffee already waiting on her desk. I hoped this day would never come, she said gently. So did I. Margaret studied my face for a moment. I assume your email wasn't sent out of anger. It wasn't. What changed? I looked through the large window overlooking the city skyline. My son publicly called me a loser. That alone wasn't enough. She waited patiently. He truly believes every success in his life belongs entirely to him. Margaret nodded slowly. So it's time, yes. She opened a thick folder labeled Sunset Protocol. Years earlier, we had created it as nothing more than a legal contingency. I never imagined I would actually use it. Margaret adjusted her glasses. Let's review everything one final time. I agreed. She opened the first file. Lucas believes his software company was funded by venture capital investors from California. That's what he believes. In reality, she continued, those investors never existed. She turned the document toward me. 6 years earlier, Lucas had come to me asking for $2 million to launch his business. His presentation had been full of enthusiasm, but painfully short on practical planning. If I had simply handed him the money, he would never have learned anything. So I refused. At least, that was what he thought. Instead, Margaret helped me establish an investment trust under complete legal confidentiality. From that trust, we created a venture capital company with professional executives acting as its public representatives. Lucas traveled across the country believing he had impressed experienced investors. He delivered his presentation. He answered their questions. He walked away convinced his talent had earned every dollar. What he never knew was that every penny originated from my own accounts. Margaret turned another page. Your trust still owns 60% of his company. I nodded. Lucas owns 20. The remaining shares are reserved for future employees. She smiled slightly. Which means your son isn't actually the owner. He's the chief executive, but not the man in control exactly. Lucas had spent years introducing himself as founder and owner. Legally, neither statement was completely true. Margaret reached for another folder. The BMW. I almost laughed. Lucas adored that car. He considered it proof that he had become successful. He proudly parked it where everyone could admire it. He never stopped to wonder why approval for such an expensive lease had come so easily. The lease belongs to Bennett Holdings, Margaret explained. My company. Correct. Lucas is simply listed as the authorized driver. She pointed toward one paragraph. If employment ends, vehicle privileges end immediately. Simple. Perfectly legal. Entirely enforceable. The repossession company has already received authorization, she added. They'll collect the vehicle Monday morning. I remained quiet. There was no satisfaction in hearing those words. Only necessity. Margaret closed that file and opened another. The apartment. This one carried greater emotional weight. After my divorce, Diane became obsessed with status. She encouraged Lucas to measure success by expensive neighborhoods, luxury buildings, and impressive addresses. Eventually, he found a penthouse beyond anything he could realistically afford. He asked if I could help with the deposit. I declined. Egan, that was only part of the truth. Years before, I had quietly purchased the entire building through another holding company because the neighborhood showed excellent long-term investment potential. Lucas never knew. When he submitted his rental application, the management company contacted him with exciting news. They claimed they wanted an ambitious young technology executive living in the building. As part of a promotional program, they offered him an extraordinary lease, nearly free rent, only maintenance fees. Lucas celebrated for weeks. He believed his reputation had earned him special treatment. In reality, he had simply been living inside one of my properties. Margaret slid the lease agreement across the desk. The incentive agreement ends if his employment status changes. I remember, property management can also terminate occupancy with 72 hours notice. I read the document carefully. Everything remained exactly as we had drafted it years earlier. Perfectly legal, perfectly documented. Margaret finally closed every folder. So what's your plan? I folded my hands together. We don't destroy everything at once. She looked curious. Why not? Because this isn't revenge. I leaned forward. When engineers remove unsafe buildings, they don't simply detonate the entire structure. They dismantle it carefully. Exactly. Remove one support. Watch how the structure reacts, then remove another. She smiled. A controlled demolition. I nodded. Monday the car, Tuesday financial control, Wednesday the apartment, and after that? I stared quietly toward the skyline. After that, Lucas will finally discover whether he knows how to stand without everything I built beneath him. Margaret closed the final folder. I'll begin immediately. As I stood to leave, she asked one final question. Do you still love your son? I answered without hesitation. More than he'll ever understand. I walked toward the elevator feeling neither victorious nor bitter. Some lessons cannot be taught with words. Some must be experienced, and by Monday morning, the first lesson would begin. The weekend passed in complete silence. I spent Saturday morning trimming the rose bushes in my backyard. Gardening had always reminded me of engineering. Healthy growth required discipline. Dead branches had to be removed before they weakened the entire plant. Sometimes saving something meant cutting part of it away. As I worked, my phone rang. Lucas. I stared at the screen until it stopped. A few minutes later, it rang again. This time it was Diane. I ignored that call as well. There was nothing left to discuss. For years, every conversation had ended the same way, with me solving problems no one appreciated and paying bills no one acknowledged. That chapter was over. Sunday was even quieter. I attended church, listened to a sermon about accountability, and returned home with an unexpected sense of peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to rescue anyone. I was simply allowing consequences to arrive. Late that evening, my computer chimed. A single email from Margaret appeared. Everything is ready. I read the message once before shutting down the computer. Tomorrow morning, the first piece of Lucas's carefully built illusion would disappear. Monday arrived bright and warm. Across the city, Lucas woke feeling confident. He had completely forgotten our argument at the restaurant. As far as he was concerned, I would eventually apologize. I always had. He dressed in a tailored navy blue suit while Claire admired him from across the bedroom. You've got that client lunch today, don't you? Lucas smiled. Big one. He adjusted his expensive watch. I'll take the BMW. First impressions matter. Claire kissed his cheek. Go impress them. He laughed confidently. I always do. Minutes later, he stepped into the underground parking garage beneath the luxury apartment building. His smile disappeared instantly. A large tow truck stood directly behind his BMW. Yellow warning lights flashed across the polished concrete floor. A mechanic wearing blue coveralls was already attaching heavy chains beneath the front axle. Lucas hurried forward. Hey! The man looked up calmly. Morning! What are you doing with my car? The mechanic checked a clipboard. Are you Lucas Bennett? Yes, then this is the correct vehicle. Lucas frowned. There must be some mistake. No mistake, I'm here to repossess it. Lucas actually laughed. That's impossible. This vehicle belongs to my company. The mechanic shrugged. I don't make those decisions. He pointed toward the paperwork. The registered owner terminated the lease. Lucas snatched the clipboard. His eyes landed on a company name he didn't recognize, Bennett Holdings, LLC. What company is this? The legal owner. It isn't. It is. Lucas pulled out his phone and immediately called the leasing company. After several transfers, a representative answered politely. My BMW is being repossessed. I need you to stop the tow truck immediately. The woman typed for several seconds. I've located your file, Mr. Bennett. Wonderful. So cancel it. I'm afraid I can't. The lease agreement was terminated this morning by the registered owner. My company owns that vehicle. According to our records, she paused. Your company was only the authorized corporate user. The legal owner is Bennett Holdings, LLC. Lucas's heartbeat quickened. I've never heard of them. I understand. Can you connect me with someone there? I'm sorry. All communication must go through their legal representatives. There's no public contact information available. Lucas looked helplessly as the tow truck slowly lifted the front wheels off the ground. His luxury sedan hung awkwardly in the air. The mechanic climbed into the truck. Within seconds, the BMW rolled backward toward the exit. Lucas stood frozen. He had arrived expecting another successful workday. Instead, he watched the symbol of his success disappear around the corner. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. An hour later, he reached his office using a rideshare service. His irritation hadn't faded. He decided coffee might improve his mood. Inside the building cafe, employees smiled politely as he approached the counter. The usual, Lucas said, and charge it to the company account. The cashier swiped the executive corporate card. A sharp electronic beep echoed across the cafe. She frowned. I'm sorry, it was declined. Lucas blinked. Try again. She did. The same result. I'm afraid the transaction isn't approved. Several people waiting in line glanced toward him. Lucas felt heat rise into his face. My company's bank must be having technical problems. He quickly paid with cash before hurrying toward the elevators. Once inside his office, he opened the company's financial dashboard. He entered his username. Access denied. He tried again. The same message appeared, then another. User authorization suspended. Contact system administrator. What? Lucas attempted 3 more times. Nothing changed. Suddenly, a new email appeared. Its sender was unfamiliar. The subject line read, Notice of corporate financial restructuring. His stomach tightened. He opened it. The message was short and painfully direct. Effective immediately, executive access to all company financial systems had been suspended. Corporate credit accounts were frozen. Major spending required authorization from majority shareholders. Lucas read the email twice, then a third time. His breathing became shallow. Who were these majority shareholders? Why hadn't anyone informed him? Before he could think further, his phone rang. The caller ID displayed one familiar name, Victor Hale. Lucas answered immediately. What happened? Victor shouted before Lucas could speak. My consulting payment never arrived. Lucas closed his eyes. I don't know. You'd better find out. I've got bills due today. So do I. Victor's voice cracked with panic. You told me your company was secure. Lucas stared silently at the frozen computer screen. For the first time, he realized he wasn't the man in control. Someone else was pulling every string, and he had no idea who. Wednesday arrived with heavy clouds hanging over the city. While I spent the morning repairing an old wooden bookshelf in my workshop, my son's carefully constructed world continued to collapse. The first day had taken away his image. The second had stripped him of authority. Now came the final lesson, his home. Lucas returned to the penthouse exhausted. The previous 24 hours had been filled with unanswered emails, nervous employees, canceled meetings, and growing rumors that something was terribly wrong inside the company. He hoped the apartment would offer some peace. Instead, he found Claire pacing across the living room. Her makeup was smudged, and her eyes were swollen from crying. The moment she saw him, she rushed over. What is happening? She demanded. My credit card was declined this afternoon. Lucas sighed. I know. The bank froze the company accounts. No, Claire interrupted. My personal card. The one you've been paying. They refused the transaction. Lucas rubbed his forehead. I'm trying to figure everything out. Claire folded her arms. Our friends keep calling. They're asking if you're losing the company. I don't know what to tell them anymore. Before Lucas could answer, someone knocked firmly on the front door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not a neighbor, not a delivery driver. Someone official. Lucas opened the door. A middle-aged man wearing a charcoal gray suit stood outside holding a large envelope. Mr. Lucas Bennett? Yes, my name is Daniel Foster. I'm the senior property manager for this building. Lucas frowned. I've never met you. I'm new. He handed over the envelope. I've been instructed to deliver this personally. Lucas opened it. His eyes scanned the first page. Then he stopped breathing. Notice of lease termination. What is this? Daniel remained calm. Your tenancy has been terminated under the conditions outlined in your lease agreement. Lucas looked up in disbelief. That's impossible. My rent is paid. The issue isn't payment, it's eligibility. Lucas stared blankly. What does that even mean? Daniel removed another document from the folder. Your apartment was provided under a corporate executive housing program. Lucas nodded. So? The agreement requires you to remain an active executive employee of the sponsoring company. I'm still CEO. The ownership group has informed us your executive authorization has been suspended. Lucas's heart pounded. This is temporary. I'm afraid that isn't our decision. Daniel pointed toward a highlighted paragraph. According to the contract, management may terminate occupancy with 72 hours notice. Lucas read the words repeatedly. They refused to change. You have until 5 o'clock Friday evening to vacate the premises. Claire grabbed the papers from Lucas's hands. No. She shook her head frantically. There has to be some mistake. Daniel spoke kindly, but firmly. There isn't. If you require moving services, we can recommend several companies. Claire's composure shattered. This is our home. Daniel offered a sympathetic nod. I understand. Good evening. Without another word, he turned and walked away. The apartment fell silent. Claire slowly lowered herself onto the sofa. She stared at the eviction notice before looking toward Lucas. You told me everything was secure. It was. You promised. I know. You said we were building a future. Lucas had no answer. Claire stood suddenly. No, you were building an illusion. She pointed toward the expensive furniture surrounding them. I left my career because I believed in you. I defended you. I trusted you. Her voice cracked. And now we're being thrown out. Lucas tried to explain. I don't understand any of this. Claire laughed bitterly. Neither do I. But someone clearly does. She looked directly into his eyes. This didn't happen by accident. Those words stayed with him, not by accident. The repossessed car, the frozen accounts, the canceled consulting payments. Now the apartment. Each event had happened with perfect timing. Someone had planned every step. Lucas walked slowly toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. His reflection stared back at him. For years he had admired that reflection. Now he barely recognized the man looking back. His phone buzzed. Victor. Lucas answered immediately. What now? Victor sounded completely different. The confident businessman was gone. His voice trembled with panic. My consulting contract has been canceled. I know. The bank called. They're reviewing my business accounts. Lucas closed his eyes. I'm sorry. Sorry, Victor shouted. My entire income came from your company. If this isn't fixed immediately, I'll lose everything. Lucas remained silent. Victor continued. Your mother is asking questions. She thinks I know what's happening. I don't. Do something. The line went dead. Lucas lowered the phone. One sentence echoed through his mind. My entire income came from your company. He frowned. That had never made sense. Victor constantly spoke about business success. Yet he depended entirely on one consulting contract. Why? The question led to another, who actually controlled the company. Lucas suddenly remembered the unfamiliar names that kept appearing on legal documents. Bennett Holdings. Unknown shareholders, Triporti ownership, nothing connected. Yet somehow, everything connected. Only one person possessed enough patience, intelligence, and knowledge to orchestrate something this precise. His father, Harold Bennett. Lucas's heartbeat quickened. For years he had mistaken quietness for weakness. What if he'd been wrong? He searched his contacts. His finger hovered over his father's name. Then he pressed call. The phone rang twice. Finally, a calm voice answered. Hello. Lucas gripped the phone tightly, his anger mixed with fear. You did this. Silence. You took my car, my company, my home. Another pause. Then his father's quiet voice returned. Lucas, I think it's finally time we talked. Less than 30 minutes later, Lucas stood inside my home. The expensive suit he wore only a few days earlier now looked wrinkled and worn. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes were bloodshot, and every trace of confidence had disappeared. I was waiting in my study, the same room where I had spent decades designing bridges, reviewing blueprints, and quietly managing the investments that had unknowingly shaped my son's life. Lucas stepped inside without speaking. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Finally, I pointed toward the wooden chair opposite my desk. Sit down. He obeyed. The silence between us was heavy. Then he looked directly at me. You planned all of this. I did. Why? I folded my hands on the desk. Because nothing else worked. His jaw tightened. You destroyed everything. I slowly shook my head. No, I only took back what already belonged to me. Lucas stared at me in disbelief. I turned my computer monitor toward him and opened a folder titled Foundation. Inside were dozens of legal documents. The company, I began. You believed investors chose you because they saw extraordinary potential. They did. They invested because I created the investment firm. I opened the ownership records. The controlling shares belonged to my trust. Lucas read every page without speaking. His face grew paler. I opened another file. The BMW, the lease wasn't signed by your company. It belonged to Bennett Holdings, my holding company. You were never the owner. You were only authorized to drive it. His breathing became uneven. Another document appeared. The apartment. The building belongs to Oakwood Properties, my company. The special executive lease existed because I approved it. You weren't receiving a reward. You were receiving help. Lucas covered his mouth with one hand. He could no longer deny the evidence. Everything he believed he owned had always belonged to me. Then I opened one final folder. Victor. Lucas looked up. What about him? I displayed the consulting agreement, every monthly payment, every invoice, every transfer. For years, I said quietly, Victor's only significant client was your company. Lucas frowned. I don't understand. Your company paid him $50,000 every month. Lucas nodded. I authorized those payments. With my money. His eyes widened. I continued. The man you admired. The man you called successful. The man your mother chose over me. I paused. Built his lifestyle using money that came from me. Lucas stared at the screen. His entire understanding of the past collapsed in a single moment. Victor hadn't rescued anyone. He had depended on the very man he mocked. The room remained silent. Eventually, Lucas lowered his head. I didn't know. I know. You thought appearances were reality. He nodded slowly. I was wrong. For the first time in years, there was no arrogance in his voice, only regret. I called you a loser. You did. I don't expect forgiveness. I wasn't looking for revenge. He looked confused. Then why? I leaned back in my chair. When you were little, I taught you that every strong building begins with a solid foundation. You remember? He nodded. You forgot the lesson. You started believing expensive cars, luxury apartments, and impressive titles made a successful man. They don't. They only decorate success. They never create it. Lucas listened without interrupting. I gave you opportunities because I loved you. But somewhere along the way, my support became your expectation. My patience became weakness. My generosity became invisible. I looked directly into his eyes. So I removed everything, not to ruin your life, to give you your own. He remained silent. The trust still exists. His head lifted. But you won't receive another dollar. Not until you've earned the life you want. Get a job. Rent a home you can honestly afford. Pay your own bills. Build something that belongs entirely to you. When you've done that, I smiled gently, you'll never need my money again. Tears filled his eyes. I'm sorry, Dad. The words were quiet, honest, different from every apology I'd ever heard before. I walked around the desk for a long moment. Neither of us spoke. Then I placed a hand on his shoulder. This is your beginning, not your ending. He nodded slowly. Without another word, he stood and walked toward the front door. I watched him leave this time. He wasn't driving a luxury sedan. He wasn't returning to a penthouse. He wasn't hiding behind a title. For the first time in his adult life, he was walking on his own. A week later, I sat on my back porch watching the evening sun disappear behind the old oak tree. The house was peaceful, no urgent phone calls, no financial emergencies, no expectations, just silence. Then my phone rang. It was Diane. She begged me to restore Victor's income, save their house and fix everything. When she finally stopped talking, I answered with only one sentence: "That is no longer my responsibility." I ended the call and set the phone aside. As the stars appeared overhead, I realized something that had taken me 72 years to understand. Real success isn't measured by wealth, titles, or possessions. It's measured by character. Money can build a comfortable life, but only integrity can build a meaningful one. And sometimes, the greatest gift a parent can give isn't another opportunity. It's the chance to earn one.